Good evening, everyone. Buenas noches, and thank you for being here tonight. I'm Mitchell Kaplan, the founder of Books and Books, right here in Miami, Florida. And on behalf of all of us at Books and Books and our presenting partners for this event, the Miami Book Fair, I welcome you to our virtual evening. I have the pleasure and honor of introducing two people I admire so very much. Senator Amy Klobuchar and Alberto Ibargüen. They are with us tonight to discuss Senator Klobuchar's new book, Antitrust, Taking on Monopoly Power from the Gilded Age to the Digital Age, published by our friends at Alfred A. Knopf. Senator Klobuchar is a senior senator from Minnesota, and she's the first woman from that state to be elected to the United States Senate. We all watched also as she ran a formidable campaign as a candidate for president of the United States. She was born in Plymouth, Minnesota, and graduated from Yale University and the University of Chicago Law School. Antitrust is an important, urgently needed book that shows how antitrust laws once saved the country from robber barons and oil tycoons, and how more than 100 years later, in the era of big tech and unprecedented corporate consolidation, they can and must do it again. And thankfully, as chair of the U.S. Senate Antitrust Subcommittee, she can do something about it. And what makes antitrust so readable is that she approaches her subject with a fervor rooted firmly in the story of her own family experience. As she writes in Antitrust, when people ask me as a senator what monopolies and antitrust policies have to do with lives, the answer is simple: everything. When I knew Senator Klobuchar was to be our guest tonight, there was only one choice I had for the moderator of tonight's conversation, Alberto Ibargüen. As president and CEO of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and former publisher of the Miami Herald and El Nuevo Herald, papers that won 3 Pulitzer Prizes and Spain's Ortega y Gasset Prize for excellence in journalism, I know Alberto to have, like the senator, a concern for the consolidation of so much in our culture. And as someone who has dedicated his life to civic discourse, Alberto's concern for how monopolies can ill affect that discourse has been as disconcerting and troubling to him as it has to the rest of us. So it's an honor for me, for Books and Books, and for the Miami Book Fair to be presenting these two very distinguished people for this very important discussion. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by clicking that little Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. And you can order your copy or your 10 copies of Antitrust from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, with further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. The Senator and Alberto. Welcome, Alberto. Welcome, Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you so much.
I just want to show everybody the book as well. This is an amazing book. So congratulations.
All right. Well, thank you, Mitch. And I love your strategically placed Barack Obama book behind you. And thank you to Books and Books.
Thank you. We're getting
something.
A lot of feedback.
Yeah. Well, let's figure out where it's coming from. Let's see if we can change ours a little bit. Yeah, I don't think it's us.
I'm not sure if that's coming. It wasn't coming from me before. Welcome to Miami.
No. We'll try it again.
Hello, everyone. Sorry for the audio issues. Alberto, do you have any headphones just by any chance? We're going to wait for a moment, everyone.
I can stay later, so we're all good.
All right, let's try it now.
Okay.
I think it's
Can you
good.
hear me?
Yeah, you're great.
The only problem is I hear a tremendous echo. I think I'm going to turn this off, but then I don't think I can hear anything. All right. We're going to get through this.
Okay.
And as long as you can hear me, Senator, and the folks can hear you, I think we're okay. I'll deal with my own feedback echo. I'm absolutely delighted to see you again. I first saw you years ago when I testified before the Senate subcommittee, when John Kerry was the chair of the subcommittee that you now chair, and it was on internet, the role of government, what government should do to promote internet, what the right role of government is. Questions that are very similar to today. And you told a story about your father being a reporter at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, which immediately made you my favorite senator, needless to say. And I was thinking about that when Mitchell talked about this book, which I actually have in a galley. But can you look at this? And how does a U.S. senator who's running for president have time to write this? But your father, Jim Klobuchar, would be proud of the storyteller who wrote that book. Congratulations. It is really readable.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. Thanks so much, Alberto. And it's so great to be on. And so I'm such an admirer of yours and what you've done for news, both in Miami with the paper and then with the foundation. That's so important that you're heading up with the work you've done with PBS and so many other news organizations. And that's one of what you asked, what drove me to write this and how did I write this?
Yeah.
What drove me to write it was my own life, seeing my grandpa way back working for Monopolies, basically, but yet doing everything he could as the son of immigrants to make sure that, unlike what happened to him, that my dad would be able to graduate from high school and go to college. He went to a 2-year community college, ending up finishing up at the University of Minnesota, and interviewing everyone from Mike Ditka to Ginger Rogers to Ronald Reagan. And that American dream happened because, yes, my grandpa had a job, but secondly, my grandma was convinced that she wanted a different life, and she wanted her family to kind of detach from some of the monopoly powers. And I think that right now what we're seeing in America is really a repeat of that Gilded Age. It used to be the robber barons and the steel trust and the sugar trust, you name it. And we're starting to see that, especially when it comes to tech. And I'm a great concern for continuing strong journalism, which has had problems in terms of paying for content. And then the second reason and how I did it, I started 3 years ago. I was starting writing it before the presidential, especially the history part. I don't need a lot of sleep. I guess
not.
Reason 3, my campaign did come to an abrupt end in February, and I was proud to endorse Joe Biden. But this got me through a lot of late nights through the spring and the summer working on this. And I have a great husband who, as I noted, has a monopoly on my affections. And he wrote the footnotes and helped a lot. And someone said, why are there so many footnotes in this book? And I said, because I wanted to keep our marriage strong.
So not all monopoly is absolute.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen, you have a wonderful way of talking about another time in U.S. history when the view of the use of antitrust was simply to say these non-government actors are just too damn big, and in order to ensure the common weal, we will have government intervene periodically. It's all about capitalism and the effective use of capitalism for the benefit of everybody, but we're going to have a say in it. And then comes along Robert Bork and Milton Friedman and Ronald Reagan, and we say, nah, never mind. Not so much community, not so much employees. We're going to focus on the shareholder and maximizing wealth. And then comes the technology that allows an incredible concentration. And now we come to the critical part of your book. I love the first part, but we are so short on time that I wonder if you wouldn't maybe give a nod to Teddy Roosevelt, and then
You don't want to hear about the inventor of the Monopoly board and the
correct.
Okay, I won't.
All right, talk about Monopoly
No,
board.
no, it's fine.
But we have to make it real for the lives of the people who are listening now, and you do that better than anybody.
Okay, and that's why I did this book, actually. And so what I point out here is that if you're someone that's sick and tired of cable rates, well, you can only look at monopoly issues. If you're someone that says, why are airfares so expensive from a mid-sized city, look at monopoly situations. If you're a farmer and you're like, wait, what is going on with fertilizer or seeds, and why is this happening? If you're someone that's looking for online travel deals, which I know a lot of people in Florida I know what I'm talking about here. It's really only two companies that own over 90% of it. And as I start out at the beginning of the book, if you're someone that a few years back had a baby with the heart of tens of thousands of parents every year, suddenly one year I got a call from a pharmacist. This is how I found this out. Life-saving heart valve drug that works extraordinarily well was bought by one company. Then that company bought the only other drug for it. And the prices went from $85 a treatment to $1,600 a treatment. And the FTC tried to take it on, but failed in court. EpiPen, insulin, these words mean things to people because monopolies are messing around with people in order to feed their profits. And so that's why I wrote this book and why it matters to you. And I have tried my best here. There's over 100 cartoons in the book, including many old ones, but a lot of new ones as well. Just to make the point, this is something that's a real political issue, and that if you don't know a lot about it, you need to learn about it because we need to get bills passed in Congress and we need to put pressure on people to actually take this on because I can't do it alone. Every time I've tried, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. You know, I get it through one committee or one Senate or one thing, and then some company pressures someone else to do something. These tech companies literally held an entire country hostage, the country of Australia, simply because they were trying to have them pay for content. And if they can walk from an entire country, they can do a lot of damage in everyone's lives.
You've picked up an ally from the other side of the aisle, who I think is kind of interesting, Senator Kennedy from Louisiana. How did that come about? What are the dynamics of a liberal Democrat and a very conservative Republican, both concerned for the common good?
Well, he cared about newspapers and he cared about making sure that we don't have them all go away to be controlled by, I don't know who is providing our news. So we got together and worked on this bill that basically says the news organization should be able to talk to each other as they negotiate for content. And I wish that we didn't have to do that, but it is the only way right now when we don't have laws that break up the tech companies. I don't want to get rid of the tech companies. I just want there to be competition, and I want to stop the exclusionary behavior where they're basically excluding others and making it hard for others to do business.
So a lot of people will say that well, our polling says 77% of Americans think the internet companies, social media and platforms have too much power, 77%. But they're split 50-49 on whether government should intervene. And some say it should be focused on privacy. Some say focus on, in this case, newspapers. Others say antitrust. Others say take out the liability protection from Section 230 and you'll be fine. Why is antitrust the right way to go?
Well, I think you have to do a bunch of these things. But you can make the argument for antitrust on the Section 230 immunity. I favor a bill that Senator Warner Hirono and I have that would have limited carve-outs on the immunity front to stop the misinformation and the insurrections and things like that. But on the antitrust front, I think it would help with everything. How do we know whether or not Instagram or WhatsApp could have developed the bells and whistles on privacy or misinformation? We don't, because according to Mark Zuckerberg's own email that was discovered in the House hearings, he said, "I'd rather buy than compete." And in another email, he said, "These companies may be nascent, but they're in our brand. And in the future," these are his words, not mine, "they could become disruptive to us." That is the very definition of monopoly. And you'll never be able to, through capitalism, which I dearly believe in, you cannot develop the bells and whistles if you don't have some kind of antitrust enforcement as well as government regulation. You can do both. You can allow capitalism to develop these great new products without squelching new competitor. And you also can have rules in place on things like privacy.
He would say to you, and I imagine he has, you don't need to tell us, but if you want to, you can, about your private conversations with Mark Zuckerberg. But he would probably say, look, we're trying to work this through. You have no idea the volume that comes in, the speed with which it comes in, the millions of dollars that we invest in artificial intelligence to try to control this. We're doing the best that anybody can. And the worst thing that could happen is a government that is 5 years behind the times or 5 months behind the time trying to tell us how to do our business.
Well, they've been saying, trust us for a really long time. And again, I'm not telling them how to do their business. I'm just putting some safeguards in place to ensure competitive behavior, which we've done through history in our country to our great advantage. And that also, look at the breakup of AT&T. You heard the same stuff then. And what happened? We got lower long distance rates. The former chairman, Allen, actually said when it was done, we're a stronger company because we were forced to compete. And you got a incredible cell phone industry out of it. Back when it started, the cell phones were the size of Gordon Gekko's briefcase in the movie Wall Street.
I remember.
All of that happened because we unleashed the forces of competition. So my issue is not that I want to get rid of them or that I hate them or anything like that. I just think that they're engaging in behavior that is going to crowd out the new developments and innovations that we need, and that we need to ensure that this happens. I think one great example recently that people didn't understand till we did this hearing, which was very bipartisan, Senator Lee and myself, on app stores, how Google and Apple, a number of companies like Spotify, Apple's own competitor, they have to pay 30% of what comes in from stuff you buy on the Apple App Store, the Google App Store, has to go to them. 30%. That is really high. And you also have the fact that they're not allowed to say, oh, you can get a better deal on our website. So those kinds of things you can fix, not by saying we're getting rid of the Apple App Store. Absolutely not. You fix it by putting some rules in place. And it may not be the Congress that passes it. It may be coming out of court cases.
But the technology that allows for the personalization in a way we've never seen in human history would suggest greater and greater pressure toward combination of one former social media with another, knowing your preferences, and all of that favors big size and big consolidation. If the technology is so strong and goes in that direction, what is antitrust policy going to do to thwart, if you will, the will of the technology?
I don't think it's thwarting the will of technology. I think it's doing its job as it's done through history to allow new competitors, new technology to develop, because we know from history that monopolies eventually, at first they charge low prices to get people in, and then eventually prices go up, but more than that, innovations go down. And so what I believe we need to do is to simply unleash the powers of antitrust laws. One, get more money to the agencies so they can enforce them. That's what Senator Grassley and I have a bill to update the filing fees. We are literally a shadow of our former selves. You can't expect the balance you're talking about, Alberto, without having these agencies put together when they're right now put together with duct tape and Band-Aids, and they're trying to take on these big companies. Looking back at exclusionary conduct and some of these deals that were made that created these empires, making sure that we've got data collected on consolidation in certain industries. And so what I'm saying is really not that radical when you look at the past, where Democrats and Republicans all believed in capitalism, where Adam Smith, the father of capitalism to our founding fathers, literally said, okay, invisible hand, yes, but watch out for the standing army of monopolies, because they will have too much political clout to make changes, as you can see by the lack of privacy policies. I think it was John Oliver who said it best. He said he spent a whole half hour on a show showing all the consolidation. He said, from cat food to caskets. And if this isn't enough to make you want to die, he said, good luck, because there's only 3 casket makers left in America. I point out now, Alberto, that one's bought the other, so there's only 2. And all we're trying to do here is not get rid of those companies, but say, okay, sometimes you're going to divest assets. Sometimes we're going to put conditions in place. Sometimes we're going to start collecting information so we're able to figure out that there's true competition. We've just been thwarted every step of the way by some of these justices and judges. And every time in American history, we've stood up for capitalism and allowed small businesses to flourish by enforcing the antitrust laws, except for the last few decades.
So let's talk about the judiciary. First of all, I didn't know that Adam Smith was on Facebook, but now that I know, I'll have to friend him or something.
He was prescient. He was ahead of his time.
Let's talk a little bit about the judiciary. The judiciary would say we're doing nothing but interpreting the laws that have been passed by Congress. Are they not?
Oh, they have greatly changed the way those laws have been interpreted over the last few decades, starting with really Bork's theories. If you go back in time, those laws were used to actually stop monopolies, break up Standard Oil, even in some cases pause some of what was going on to allow new companies to come in the market. The way they have interpreted since Bork's time has made it really, really difficult. At one point, in one 15-year span, plaintiffs were 0 for winning antitrust cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. That creates a dampening effect. And they did it because, as you asked about, they didn't want to have a lot of government intervention in the economy. Well, now they've had the opposite effect, as you see Republican after Republican decrying the monopolies we now have in the tech area. That wouldn't have happened if these justices and others following their precedent hadn't stepped in. And I think the children's heart valve drug is the best example. It's why I lead. You had a U.S. senator, I'll say a new one at that, the entire FTC, bunch of AGs all over the country saying this is outrageous. And basically the court said, we're going to let this go. That just shouldn't happen.
I was a member of, I have to be careful, I guess, about how I ask this question, but I was a member of a public company board, being advised by counsel at one point. And I asked whether, in considering the proposal, we as a board could consider the interests of community and where the communities where we use the product and the employees, as well as the shareholder. And the answer was Delaware law, which of course is the key interpreter of corporate law. Delaware law was clear. You only consider the shareholder. How do you break that? Who is the Bork on the other side, or who is the Milton Friedman?
Oh.
Are you? Is that going to be you?
Oh, well, there's plenty of people. Oh, I'm one of them, but I'm not on the court. Justice Breyer is a hero when it comes to antitrust. Here's another one for you. Merrick Garland, the new Attorney General, used to teach antitrust. He understands it. When he was chosen and announced by President Biden, he had the audacity to bring up antitrust. Merrick Garland did on the stage. The Biden administration has put in out-of-the-box thinkers on antitrust, like Tim Wu in the White House and Lena Khan, who they've nominated for the FTC. All of these people have experiences that I think are very important. I don't think, Alberto, that we're going to change the court precedent soon enough to deal with what we have to do with the monopoly tech companies. I think we need to build to that, but I think we also need to change the laws, which we've done many times. This is not radical. I'm talking about changing who has the burden in big mega mergers to show whether or not something's going to hurt competition. I'm talking about looking at what the standard is for how much harm you have to do before the court starts looking at it. Those are things we have changed over time, but we've just simply done nothing. Our laws have to be as sophisticated as the people that are messing around with us. That's how it's always been. And I am so afraid that every time we try to do this, someone under some theory comes out of the woodwork, says, no, we can't do this. Well, it's one of the monopolists. It's what Adam Smith warned about. He warned about that the monopolies would have so much power in Congress. There's a very famous old cartoon of the Senate debating with these huge fat trusts above them, like the Steel Trust and the Railroad Trust, looking down, just basically telling them what to do. That's basically what's been going on. It's why I wrote the book, because I need the public behind me to have some understanding of I know it's not an easy topic, but I tried to make it understandable so I can get people interested in this again.
Well, that's a terrific sort of near ending, because we're getting to the point of including the audience with some Q&A that Mitchell will tell us about. But the first part of the book, which actually I think is the most accessible, it's a history with lots of anecdotes about how antitrust was. Then there's the change in the theory, and the last part of the book, which I think is actually the hardest, but the meat of it is, what do we do now? Mm-hmm. If you had just three things, I know it was a 20-some recommendations, mm-hmm. and I thought, well, okay, but let's say we don't get all 20. Okay. Give me three we have to have.
Mm-hmm. I would put incredibly smart, aggressive people in charge of the agencies and give them the funding that they need to do their job. So that involves both a president making that decision as well as Congress getting them the funding. If you're serious and want to complain about monopolies, you better do that first. And Senator Grassley gets that. Secondly, I would change the standards that we have right.
Hello.
And this is really key, looking backwards.
Senator, I'm sorry. I think you froze for just a little bit there.
Oh, in part two. Can you hear me now?
In part two. Now, yes, exactly.
Okay, so
part two.
One was the agencies putting aggressive people in. Part two is looking at the mergers going forward and putting a stricter standard in place. And then part three, which is key, is looking back, just as the government did with the AT&T empire, which was both a vertical and a horizontal monopoly over all the equipment underneath it, and then over all the phone service across the country. Looking back at what's happened in areas like tech, where presidents of both parties allowed mergers to occur, and now we are in, including with pharma, a situation that you can't just fix going forward. You have to go back and put some guardrails on.
You've mentioned twice the decimated agency. Oh, I don't know. You didn't say decimated, but the significantly reduced agency. Is that something that comes that came just in the Trump administration, or does that come from Bush, Obama, and then Trump too?
It is over a series of years, although President Trump, while he had some good people working in those areas, Commissioner Simon is the one that took on the case on Facebook, which was very significant, and he did it with Democratic AGs across the country and Republicans. And Megan Delrime, I didn't agree with everything he did, like on marijuana mergers, but he did take on a major case against Google. So I found, as I wrote that part about the Trump administration, I found there were people, including career people, trying to do his job, but Trump politicized things so much. And that made it, you lost that moment where there was starting to be momentum to take on monopolies. Going back in time, yes, the people who've worked with President Obama, including people like Gene Sperling, have said, we should have done more. These mergers were coming in the tech area, and we should have done more. So you'd spend years of underfunded agencies and then some good work, but things not taken on. I tried to sort of not make this a focal point, because I'm telling you, you can have a lot of blame to go around of what happened, which I clearly go through the history. I want to look forward, and looking forward means fixing what we messed up in the past.
Good. So what about the European Union and the way they're regulating these companies? Is there a model there that we can copy?
Sure. There's a woman named Margaret Vestager who heads up the EU competition policy. And by the way, despite calling my book Antitrust, I would rather call all of this competition policy, even though Antitrust has a certain, double meaning with antitrust, which is going on right now with a lot of our institutions. But what they're doing in Europe is they have some different laws. It's easier for them to do things sometimes. But they've really taken this on in a thoughtful way, to look at the gatekeepers, to start assessing fines. They just came out with action when it comes to app stores, when we had just had a hearing 2 weeks before. When it happened with Australia, when Google and Facebook threatened to leave the entire nation of Australia, Europe stood up, she stood up, and a bunch of leaders in the US stood up. So I see us coordinating with our allies across the world, really, to take this on instead of being at odds with them.
How much did the Australian resolution have to do with the fact that Microsoft broke ranks?
Yeah, well, I'll say, so Microsoft, it was cool. They did step in and they said, hey, we'll offer a search engine. Now, you got to realize, though, Google was at 90%. So that would have been very disruptive if Google left. And I'm glad Microsoft stood up. It probably helped. But I think the other thing that helped was the outcry of leaders in this area across the world. So they just thought they could mess around. Now, in Australia, of course, News Corp, Rupert Murdoch was pushing it. They had the resources to do it, to say, and our country right now, Senator Kennedy and I are trying to get a coalition of newspapers and other news organizations to be able to take this on. And so, like anything else, sometimes you have strange bedfellows when it comes to this stuff. But I just feel so strongly, maybe because I'm as you mentioned, the daughter of a journalist who spent an incredible career. He's still alive, by the way, at age 93.
Oh, really? No, I didn't realize that.
No, it's
okay.
So
then it's,
it's fine.
I'm sorry, I was wrong. It's
it
not that Jim would have been, it's that he is proud.
In the last year, he graduated from hospice and survived COVID, but we'll just let that go.
Fantastic.
So in any case, I really grew to admire not only his work, but all journalists. And it scares me to death that we're going to lose investigative journalism, maybe not at the big newspapers, right? Maybe not at the New York Times and the Washington Post, but if you start losing it in cities like Miami or Minneapolis, and you aren't able to have the coverage, which we do now with the Star Tribune and with a number of other smaller papers throughout our state, but they're just hanging in there. And they have look at what the George Floyd trial of Derek Chauvin and things like that. The local journalists have a unique ability to be able to cover some of this.
I want to put in a plug for MinnPost, which we support.
Very good.
At Knight Foundation.
Big fan of the MinnPost.
And the Pioneer Press, which was a Knight paper.
Thank you.
A Ritter paper, but a Knight Ritter paper.
You're doing, you know what? You're showing you're a true anti-monopolist.
I'm just saying,
all the competitors.
These are the ones we support.
No. MinnPost actually has a fundraising drive. There, as you know, an online paper, one of the first in the country, that got some incredible journalists. Weird factor, when my dad was his last job for about maybe $100 a column when he was, pretty much senior, was writing the weekly column about the Vikings games for MinPost.
Well, good.
And so I am a big fan. Yeah.
So just for people who don't understand, what your bill would do is it would allow organizations, companies that usually are not allowed to collaborate on pricing to be able to negotiate with the big guys as one.
Exactly.
Okay.
And over a period of time, it phases out. You can't keep doing it, but it allows a reset. And just to your point, an internet newspaper or a small newspaper in Lanesboro, Minnesota, or, even when you go to your markets in Florida, they are not going to, on their own, be able to take on trillion and $2 trillion companies in their negotiations. So right now, when we have these monopolies, it's really the only way we're going to guarantee right payment for news content.
Okay. I have two small questions before we go to the questions from the audience. One is China, and the other is trust in institutions. The internet companies will say, if you start breaking us up, how can we compete with a quarter of the world's population controlled from a central authority?
So throughout history, that argument could have been used all the time, right? But in fact, breaking up Standard Oil, breaking up AT&T made our country's competitors stronger. And so I just don't buy that we want to be like China, right? And say, well, we just have one company and you have one company, and then together we can have two big monopolies. I don't buy that at all. Yes, we have to keep safety standards in place. And yes, we understand that they have to charge for various things they do on the app stores, but not 30% to a competitor. And not when you can't explain why Uber doesn't have to pay, but Spotify does when they're in their market. None of this makes sense. Or Match.com. So I think that you can develop these products to compete with in a better way. And don't tell me what we've got now is good, because it's not the way things are moving. And a lot of this is going to have to do with working with our allies to put standards in place when it comes to China, whether it's trade negotiations, whether it's what the Biden administration does, whether it's international antitrust enforcement. So I understand that threat of China, but I don't think the answer is to become China.
And so
I never said that before. That was a pretty good answer.
That was a very good answer. Well, I'm just the interviewer here. I'm not supposed to have an opinion.
You are.
But it was a pretty good answer. So in other words, you're trying to regulate for the purpose of ensuring competition, as opposed to regulating for controlling growth or for controlling the business.
And in a purple, sometimes red state like Florida, we have to note that Republicans in the past, from Teddy Roosevelt, Sherman of the Sherman Act was a Republican senator from Ohio. This has always been bipartisan. And that's why I'm actually glad those suits against Facebook and Google were started during the Trump administration and continued by the Biden administration. So
let me ask my final question before the audience, which has to do with trust in institutions. I want to go back to what I told you, one of the surveys we did with Gallup, that we funded at Gallup, saying that with 77% of Americans saying they have too much power, and yet only half of Americans think government should step in to regulate. I read that as another piece of evidence of the continuing erosion of trust in institutions that we have in the country. I'm an old news person, and I'm old, and I'm not so old, but I'm a news person, and so I see local news at the core of that lack of trust. When I see the news deserts that we have in many, many places throughout the country, they should be so lucky as to have Minneapolis and St. Paul with MinPost having 3 major outlets, not even counting lots of weeklies and so forth, or Miami. Yes, and NPR and PBS and television, radio, all of that. Great. There are lots of parts of this country where that simply isn't any longer available. Do you see that as a way back to trust? And if not, what what do you see as the way back to a trust in institutions? I'm not arguing for a return to newspapers. I do believe that news, information, and informed citizenry is at the core of an effective democracy. But I'm concerned specifically about the lack of trust in virtually any institution except maybe for the Army and the library. Two organizations that Americans seem to continue to trust at this point, and none others, including federal government.
Truth matters. And I think we certainly saw that coming out of the insurrection. I was in the middle of it and know very well what happened that day. And a lot of people were spouting things and believed things that they ran on the internet, and of course incited by the then president of the United States. But in the end, I actually do get solace in our local news, not just the newspapers, actually a lot of our local TV news, whatever network it is, they are reporting the local news. And so you want to have, and people do, they may say they don't trust a lot of stuff, but if you ask them if they trust their local anchor that goes on and tells them if there's a fire or a tornado or that there's been a murder or things like that, or that the government is doing a good thing or bad thing, I think a lot of times they do trust them. They trust their local news. And so building that local news and making sure it's happening from making sure we can pay for content to doing anything we can. And there's a bunch of things that's happened over time from the cost of newsprint on that we've had to get involved in. I think it's critical, because if we don't have a shared understanding of what's happening in this country, we get what happened on January 6th at the Capitol. Other things that gives me faith, the fact that that inauguration happened 2 weeks later, that Roy Blunt and Mike Pence and I, were the last three walking down with a mahogany box held by two young girls through the shattered glass to make sure that we did our jobs. The fact that George Bush was there on that inaugural stage, and Dan Quayle sitting next to Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and the leaders of Congress from all sides. Those are moments that we cherish in a democracy. And I don't think we should forget that, despite all of the untruths going out there. What has bothered me as a member of the Senate is that when you want to fix things ahead of time before they get to an insurrection, we keep getting stopped. And a lot of time it's special interests that want stuff that isn't consistent with what the American people want. And whether it's minority-owned businesses and Hispanic-owned businesses in Miami having the ability to start up, and maybe they can start up, but then it's hard to compete in a monopoly environment, whether it is people who want a better deal on their online travel. People are starting to say, wait a minute, how come there's these big monopolies? Why don't you do something about it? And they've got to just keep pushing. Change happens when people work at it and ask questions of their electeds. Otherwise, we would give up on our democracy, and I'm not ready to do that.
Terrific. And by the way, that asking questions of the electorate is the fifth of the five freedoms in the First Amendment. Everybody always talks about freedom of religion and freedom of press and freedom of speech and assembly, but there's also that right of redress, which is such an American and an amazing privilege and right. Mitchell, I think I'm supposed to say, come on back, if I'm not mistaken, and you will somehow magically, there it is.
Hi, Mitchell.
Okay. Welcome back. You're on mute.
Can we hear you? You're muted. This is what we always say to the senators. You're muted still. You're muted. Or maybe someone mutes them. That I can't say.
And you're still muted.
Hi, Mitchell. Try to unmute yourself from your side.
Okay, he said, I'm reading lips. The first question from the audience is, he's saying.
Oh, I see the questions, Mitchell.
All right, give me 1 second, Mitchell.
What can citizens do? How can we get involved?
Yes,
There's a question.
I have a number of ideas there. For one thing, you can get involved with some of the groups, or at least get on their websites of places like Open Markets that put out information on this all the time, and I list them in the book. Secondly, Ask your elected official, what are you doing on antitrust? How come you haven't passed the Klobuchar-Grassley bill, which has a bunch of bipartisan support to help fund the agencies? How come you're not doing something about this exclusionary conduct and monopolies? Talk isn't enough. You need to pass something. And then I think making sure you buy local and you support your local news and you support local small businesses is equally important. Those are just a few of the ideas.
Well, that was actually one thing. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. That was actually one thing I wanted to explore a little bit with both of you, and particularly the senator. You have a marvelous epigram, which is from one of the rulings by Justice Thurgood Marshall, where you say antitrust laws in general and the Sherman Act in particular are the Magna Carta of free enterprise. They are as important to the preservation of economic freedom and our free enterprise system as the Bill of Rights is the protection of our fundamental personal freedoms. And the freedom guaranteed each and every business, no matter how small, is the freedom to compete, to assert with vigor, imagination, devotion, and ingenuity whatever economic muscle it can muster. That resonated with me as a small business person really greatly. And that was in 1972. So where did we go off the rails? Where did all of a sudden we no longer think about how to preserve the right of small business to be able to compete? And we've gotten these gigantic monopolies, which are putting small businesses out of business.
It had a lot to do with two things. One, lobbying by big interests so that Congress didn't do anything. And secondly, courts who somehow lost the originalist intent, you love that I'm saying this, of those bills and of the Sherman Act. Because you look back through history, I'm not just going to talk about Adam Smith, the founding fathers, they literally, when you go way back to the Pilgrims coming over, everyone, it was about religious independence and liberty, and it was about political independence. But it was also because a bunch of these colonists didn't want to buy their tea from a monopoly tea party. Tea company, the East India Tea Company, that was owned by British. And so you go through the history and you keep seeing people standing up on the side of small business. The Grangers movement that came out of the Midwest, the farmers with their pitchforks, the union movement in Chicago. So much of this was workers, but also small businesses, small business owners that didn't like that people were controlling all their means of getting goods to market. And so that's what we need to recapture again. And I think it's actually positive that you've seen a number of Republicans. They're not just interested in the tech content stuff, where I don't agree with them. They just go after tech. They think some liberals that work there.
The content part.
That's not the right reasoning. But there are Republicans like Senator Grassley who are looking this in a different way, and who are willing to talk about not just tech, but also other monopolies, and also see it as a business issue. And so we need to, and I was proud that Mark Warner, who got on my bill, my big bill when it comes to monopolies, because he gets it. He was very successful in business. I worked for 14 years in the private sector representing companies. I truly believe in capitalism. And without this kind of check, you're going to just start seeing a stifling of capitalism. And that's where we're headed right now if we don't at least put a check and balance on it.
Yeah, when you and I first met, the question that I addressed in that hearing was Congress regulating content scares me. Congress aiding and regulating the process for a fair playing field. That which I think is what you're talking about seems reasonable. There's a great question here, Mitchell, from someone named Natalie. There's a millennial who has grown up with this tech. We've seen how companies, Instagram, WhatsApp, have purchased Facebook. They have access to so much of our data, which we consent to. If antitrust laws are implemented, how fast would these laws come into effect? I want to ask Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, has been working for at least 12 years that I know, that I've known him, trying to make it so that we each own and control our personal data. Is that a possibility in your mind, that is the horse out of the barn on the personal data stuff? or can antitrust be a way to have us regain control of our personal data?
Yes, but you also, I believe, need privacy rules of the road. We are basically profit centers when it comes to this, right? You send an email or you do something, you mention a ceiling fan, and suddenly, or you do a Google search, suddenly you start seeing all these ads for ceiling fans. I've heard just hilarious stories of people's moms writing them about something, and then they end up in this crazy world of, getting all these ads about quilts and things. So, I mean, this is happening right now. So I think that you got to put a price on that data that should be going back to the taxpayers. So one, you should be able to opt out of it if you want, and that's got to be in plain language. Or you could have even stronger standard that you need to opt in if you want to be able to be used like that. And there's bills out there right now. Maria Cantwell's leading one. I have one with Senator Kennedy, we already talked about, a bipartisan bill. 2, you got to be notified about privacy breaches nearly immediately so you know what happened. So politically, what's interesting right now is all the companies, not just tech companies, were lobbying against the federal privacy laws. I know it. I got the visit. Then the state started acting aggressively. So pretty soon, hey, we want a federal privacy law. That's fine. And it's better to do it that way, but it's got to be strong enough to mean something. So I think the answer to Natalie's question about data centers, antitrust laws help because we're going to get competitors, as I noted before, like a WhatsApp or Instagram that can develop the bells and whistles through capitalism. You want that. Government's not going to be able to invent how you do that. But what the government can do is put safeguards in place for consumers like we do all the time. It's completely legal.
So there is a question that someone's asking here about getting to a place where could we ever get to a time when people are there's only allowed to own one modality when it comes to the news? You know, they're able to own. Remember, there used to be
And there's been limits, and
there used to be limits and restrictions as to how many if can you own a newspaper and a TV station in the same market and that kind of thing. That seems to have been fallen off.
We've seen monopolization in this area. We've got cable issues, of course, with monopolization that has hurt people. And then there's issues of ownership. And the Trump administration was heading in a direction I thought was wrong on that front. And so I actually have a section in the book about it. So I think it's something else that needs to be looked at in terms of ownership. Also, actually, there's cross-ownership issues in general with boards of directors and airlines and things like that. There's a professor at Harvard who has looked at all of this, and it's a little bit of the trusts of old. It's just a new way of doing it, where you have ownership of competing companies with the argument that the major shareholders are going to have undue influence over decisions, and yet they own the competitor. And there are ways you can do this. You have to make sure you're not hurting small investors when you take this on. But it's not just in news organizations, honestly, it's across the board. And there's an interesting section about it. And what I call for on that front is to have a new administration, which look at this really aggressively in terms of what's happening.
You also talk a lot. You talk about,
and if I could just follow up on that. So is the first place to look the definition of what market is? Because I could see
He's
a
looking
conglomerate.
At this person. Yes, the markets have changed and how you define them and what the market is. And so, yes. And we also have to remember that you're dealing here with competing with these tech companies in many other areas, particularly ad revenue. We sucked off a bunch of the ad revenue from the media content producers. So it's a complicated area, but we've really done nothing the last few years on it. And it really cries out for someone looking at it. Not to mention bookstores. Okay, I said that for you.
Well, I was very struck by how your husband proposed to you, right?
in the nonfiction aisle of what was then called the Hungry Mind bookstore.
I knew the owner of the Hungry Mind bookstore,
Yeah,
Alan,
exactly.
who owned it. It was a great
Didn't
bookstore.
want to be in the fiction aisle. He also did it on Lincoln's birthday. He is a huge fan of Lincoln. And so then, of course, I'm calling for venues for our wedding, and there's a weekend in between. So when you call, everyone goes, "Are you a Valentine's Day engagement bride?" I'm like, "No, I'm a Lincoln's birthday, February 12th."
I don't think we have a card for that.
That's very funny. My niece is actually getting married in Vermont, which was the home of Lincoln's oldest son in
Yes.
Vermont. And
Oh,
they have a place
good.
there or something in Manchester. But the other thing that you talk about, which really struck me, and maybe you can tie it together for the audience, is income disparity and monopolies.
Yes.
How does that play into effect?
Exactly. And I think I'll kind of tie it in a little bit with one of the questions I see here from Susan on campaign financing and these
Right.
kinds of
That's what made me
it all
think.
goes. I have a section in the book called We the People, which hits on this because you always think about monopolies, as we've talked about here, small businesses, innovations, prices, how it affects consumers, how they're excluding competitors from coming in. But there's something else going on. When you only have one monopoly and a worker maybe has the skills in that area that the monopoly controls, you can't bargain for good wages when there's only one big company on the block. And you also see monopolies in the past having conspired basically to set wages down. There's not a lot of those lawsuits, but there have been some major ones, including one against the tech companies. And so that was actually successful with people who worked at them, that there was some attempt between the companies to say, we won't hire each other's workers. You see what that does. And so the key here is to look at this not just through the lens of economic competition, but also worker competition. And unions have historically come up as a counterweight to monopolies. That's everything that happened in Chicago with the tragic Haymarket riot and what happened there, which started as a peaceful march. But all of that really Pullman strike. That came out of monopolies, the union movement. So that goes hand in hand. The finance question asked here, as I said before, monopolies are great at having a lot of control over judges historically. After the Sherman Act passed, it was a decade. Cases were brought that were outrageous, and the court kept going, no. And the same thing happens, sadly, right now in Congress when there's a lot of power. So that's why I recommend in one of the chapters of the book, the We the People, is passing the For the People Act and doing something about campaign finance and the Disclose Act and things that we're doing. And stay tuned because we'll be chairing a hearing on that. I will be on the Senate Rules Committee on May 11th. And that's to mark up the bill to send it to the floor.
Well, that's great. Senator Klobuchar, I think I want to pick up on something that Alberto said, that, we've talked a lot about policy here, but the book for me was also an amazing history of, it's basically a history of our country, an economic history through the discussion of monopoly. And I learned so much here. And you can tell your husband that I even read believe it or not, there are like 300 pages of footnotes.
You did not read all of them.
I read a lot of them.
Okay.
So there are.
He went to the Evelyn Woods system of reading.
No, it's a big tome, but the senator's part of it is about 350 pages, and the rest are footnotes,
right,
which I've never quite seen. But your father, as
I said,
Alberto,
I wanted to keep our marriage together. I wasn't going to
right. But as Alberto says, it is so lively and so well written, and the way you bring the personal into it from the very beginning, talking about what happened, with that unfortunate drug situation in Minneapolis and Minnesota. I just can't thank you enough for writing this, for being here with us, and for advocating for small businesses, for newspapers, for the American people. So I thank you very, very much. And Alberto, you were remarkable as always.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Your questions, Alberto. I think you did great in a technological challenge. I was impressed.
I'm still hearing echoes. But great to be with you. Thank you so much. Senator.
And I
Thank
do
you,
want to
Mitchell.
remind everybody that it's not too late to purchase a copy of the book right at the green button. And we thank you and good luck with everything. And we thank you, Senator.
All right. Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.